Welcome to Table for 92, element number 83, bismuth. It's number 83 because it has exactly 83 protons within its nucleus. All right, so since bismuth is the active ingredient in Pepto-Bismol, I'm gonna be making a Pepto-Bismol reduction sauce over a nice venison backstrap. No, I'm just kidding. That would be disgusting. But yeah, bismuth is the active ingredient in Pepto-Bismol. It's the Bismol part. It helps with tummy aches. Apparently there is a cocktail named the Pepto-Bismopolitan, but it sounds super gross, so I'm not doing that either. Now I'm making some outrageously French foods, escargot, and pairing it with some other very rich, outrageous French foods. So rich that, if you overdo it, you'll probably need a little Pepto-Bismol. Bismuth is found in some foods, but it's not like in any dangerous amounts or anything. But when it is ingested, it is absorbed in the viscera, right? That's important. So who gets the credit for discovering bismuth as a distinct metal is a hard one to answer. As far as the chemistry goes, it was a Frenchman who was able to demonstrate it was a distinct chemical element from tin and lead. And French physicists later discovered its single isotope, which will be important later in this story. The poor dude who discovered bismuth as a chemical element was Claude Francois Geoffroy the Younger. His father was also a famous chemist, so he's the younger. I say poor dude because he died when he was 23. It was just the year after he actually showed the distinctiveness of bismuth in 1753. But yeah, it was the 1700s. People died all the time for no reason. By the way, the word bismuth comes from a bad translation of the weiße Masse. It means white mass in German, given its silvery white color and pure form. So I've made escargot a few times since I first visited France and had it. When I was in France, I was like, okay, I'll try this snotty French dish. But when I was okay, this is actually really good. I take back everything bad I've said about French food in France before, like calling them a bunch of cheese-eating surrender monkeys. That's just terrible. I heard that from The Simpsons. I apologize. I love France. I love the French people. I love French food. But yeah, that is a pretty sick burn. Anyway, escargot, not really that difficult, but you gotta get the right snails. Otherwise, you absolutely need some Pepto-Bismol. I mean, really, the shells are just kind of decorative because you can't buy live snails in the US. You can't import them from France. They're invasive species. There's California, New York, they actually do have snail farms, but they can't export them to other states. So they already cook them, they can them, they freeze them, and then they ship them out. But they don't want live snails actually getting out. So basically, it comes with the shell. You can use mushrooms, like cremini mushrooms, as an alternative. First off, bismuth is one of the few metals that ancient peoples were aware of, but we don't really know if ancient peoples were completely aware of bismuth as a separate entity. We find some artifacts from 3,000 years ago in ancient Sumeria and modern day Iraq, but it's not pure bismuth. It's silver bismuth alloys or lead and tin alloys. As you can see, they're all table buddies. They're right next to each other. So they have pretty similar properties. Bismuth isn't really found in a pure state in nature. It's incredibly rare, and often it's binded with silver or lead. So those bismuth artifacts are more likely an impurity than anything else, but we just don't know. Plus the idea of a chemical element, something that cannot be reduced down into anything else, was a long way off. That didn't come until the late 1700s, really. We don't really know if bismuth was known as a separate metal, but it was definitely used. Probably just, again, as an impurity in lead and silver. We have tons of artifacts that have bismuth alloys. My absolute favorite, though, it's from these Incan bronze daggers. There's one with a llama engraved hilt. It's just beautiful. The first one was actually discovered in Machu Picchu in Peru in 1912, but it dates from the 1400s. Today, we do use bismuth bronze as a thing, but usually it's 1 to 3% bismuth mixed with tin and copper. The dagger they found was 18% bismuth. So I really think they must have known what they were doing at that time. So not only, is this the earliest example of using bismuth to make bronze, but it also coincided with the earliest discovery of bismuth as a separate metal back in Europe. During the Renaissance period in Europe, alchemy was all the rage. It sounds crazy in hindsight that for hundreds of years, these proto-scientists that we kind of really look up to nowadays were 100% serious about turning base metals like lead into gold. It was really popular though, even Sir Isaac Newton got into it. But yeah, apparently some of these alchemists did some good science because we now know one of them was able to extract and isolate bismuth sometime around the year 1400. The individual or individuals, they're not known. We have no clue who did it, but it happened right around the same time Incans were making bismuth bronze halfway around the world. So, cool coincidence. Oh yeah, and people all over the world eat snails. By the way, it's not a French thing. Escargot literally means snail in French, so like that's an easy one. Archaeologists have found snail shell fragments at 170,000 years ago in South African caves, suggesting that they were cooked. So snail meat, it's outrageously nutritious. It's high in iron, protein, potassium, calcium, everything we would have needed as hunter-gatherers 170,000 years ago, especially for the elderly and young who, often need to eat soft foods. So interesting to think about that. The modern story of bismuth in Europe, though, it's kind of funny, but also really sad. Alchemist dudes in Europe figured out bismuth, right about the same time the Incans did. We don't know who it was. And instead of you making those cool llama-headed daggers like the Incans were, the Renaissance Europeans used bismuth as paint pigments first. It actually started a craze in Europe at the time, bismuth malerai, or bismuth painting. Yeah, and all the big Renaissance painters, used that bismuth stuff. It gives off a dark, grayish, almost silvery color, which was perfect for the dark and shady themes that many Renaissance painters were using. Fra Bartolomeo, a very famous artist, was possibly the first painter to use bismuth in Renaissance Italy. But, all the big ones used it. Michelangelo, Donatello, Caravaggio, basically most of the Mutant Ninja Turtles. But unfortunately, a lot of the most beautiful works of art that were made in Florence and Renaissance Italy at that time were burned by crazy religious zealots. It's sometimes hard to understand how religious people were back in the 1400s because, while it was the Renaissance going on, there was a major pushback from elements of the Catholic Church to this rebirth of science and art. So one of the most notorious folks in that realm was the monk Savonarola of Florence, who temporarily gained control of the Florentine city-state from the famous Medici family in one especially charged incident of religious frenzy. He forced many Florentines, painters, as well as the rich and the poor, to burn their valuables as a way to repent against their sins and usher in a new Jerusalem in Florence. So we lost a lot of those early bismuth malerai paintings to this crazy apocalyptic preacher. And it left the world with a slightly less beauty in it. Oh, it's funny though, of course, there's still a portrait of Savonarola that Bartolomeo painted for him, and it survived to the modern era because, I guess that wasn't too vain to burn. But Savonarola eventually pissed off the Pope, and another rival preacher challenged him to walk through fire as a way to prove his claims as a miracle worker, and Savonarola, of course, backed down. Then the public turned against him and burned him at the stake, so kind of like poetic justice, I guess, right? Was he thinking about those paintings while they were burning them? I wonder. Oh, and by the way, those early alchemy dudes in Europe were kind of right. You can turn base metals into gold, but just not in the way that they had in mind back in the Renaissance times. Glenn Seaborg, he was the discoverer of 10 elements, including plutonium and the eponymous Seaborgium, recipient of the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1951. So he led the first team to create gold from another metal, bismuth. Oh, and he was not depicted in the movie Oppenheimer, even though he was all up in Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. In 1980, he created gold from thousands of bismuth atoms in a process called transmutation, finally binding together the hundreds of years of failed alchemy experiments to the modern science of nuclear physics. And if you're wondering why we don't get cheap gold from bismuth transmutation, well, I'm going to quote an article from Scientific American. To produce gold, all you need is a particle accelerator, a vast supply of energy, and extremely low expectation of how much gold you will end up with. Yeah, so gold out of the ground is still way cheaper than gold transmutated from bismuth. It would be pretty dope to have a Philosopher's Stone gold necklace, but it would take so much energy to do that. You could actually use lead to make gold too, just like the alchemists of olden days if you wanted to, but it turns out bismuth is better because it only has one stable isotope, which the French discovered, where lead has 4 stable isotopes. So I'm going to paraphrase that Scientific American article about the transmutation again. Using the particle accelerator, the team boosted beams of carbon and neon nuclei nearly to light speed and then slammed them into foils of bismuth. When a high-speed nucleus in the beam collided with a bismuth atom, it sheared off part of the bismuth nucleus, leaving a slightly diminished atom behind. By sifting through the particulate wreckage, the team found a number of transmutated atoms in with 4 protons that had been removed from a bismuth atom to produce gold. So they then go on to say that the amount of gold was so small that they produced that they had to identify it by measuring the radiation given off the unstable gold nuclei over the course of a year. So yeah, maybe not the most cost-efficient way to make a gold necklace from this transmutation process. So that was some of the earliest uses of bismuth as paint back in the late 1400s, and today it's still used in a lot of ceramics, but there was still some doubt in Europe as to whether or not bismuth was its own metal. Of course, the Incans had seemed to figure it out, but Agricola, the famous German chemist of the 16th century, he was the first to posit bismuth as a distinct metal from antimony and lead. But at the time, the idea of a chemical element was yet to occur, so it was not really recognized as what you would call an element today. But they were starting to, like figure all that stuff out. Whatever they knew about bismuth, though, they weren't working with 100% pure bismuth quite yet. Oh, and the bismuth you find at a gem shop, like this one, it's grown in a lab. Yeah, like I used to sell minerals and fossils and stuff, and the look of disappointment among customers when I told them that it wasn't naturally formed was always like a fun part of the job. Especially those folks who were like super into magic crystals and like their so-called, healing properties. Like, I get it. New Age thoughts surrounding the natural world has somehow come to the conclusion that crystals and minerals have healing properties and like energy or whatever. Of course, they can never really calculate that energy in like kilojoules or anything. But yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Like, this won't cure cancer. It's cool to look at, but that's about it. Like, we do know some elements like do have antimicrobial properties like copper. That's why we put them in door handles. It helps to slow the spread of disease. Bismuth in Pepto-Bismol because it also helps to stop harmful bacteria. There's a basis for that, but you're not gonna cure cancer with this. The only energy that's gonna come out of these things, it's radiation. I mean, when you get this lab-grown bismuth, it looks like it could have been given to us by like benevolent aliens or something, but it's actually just the atomic structure of bismuth in its pure, unnatural form. So what makes bismuth help with upset tummies? It's a kind of bismuth salt that basically prevents the bacteria that is giving you tummy aches from attaching itself to the mucus of your tummy, to put it in the most scientific terms. We've known about bismuth helping out with the gastrointestinal problems for like about 100 years. The FDA approved it in 1939, so it's been around for a while. It's pretty neat. Today, bismuth is used mainly as an alloy. It's pretty brittle, like I can even kind of feel it in this. Bismuth bronzes are still used today, but they don't use near the amount of bismuth that the Incans used to back in the day. Honestly, I would bet that most bismuth is sold to tourists and rock shops like this, because they're found within every single one. Like, honestly, you go to any single rock shop in the world, they will have this stuff in it because it's so cool looking. So yeah, just assemble a little charcuterie board, some baguette, some French salami, some brie, some raclette to go with the escargot, or if you're doing this, any outrageous French foods you can think of, because bismuth is a pretty French element. All in all, bismuth, this stuff's beautiful, it's fascinating. It was used in those Incan daggers. It is preserved in some of the most beautiful Renaissance paintings ever painted, at least the ones that Savonarola didn't burn. He was a bad, bad man, that Savonarola. Yank it out. Baguette. A little bit of brie. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, escargot is great by itself. The butter definitely helps a lot though, but yeah, it makes a little add-on in the charcuterie board. It's really good. Thanks. See you next time.